What you are about to hear now are more haunting stories of promising careers annihilated by a single bullet, of fame being no shield from a sudden brutal attack, and of players who committed acts so monstrous they became modern-day monsters. These are the cases that ripped through locker rooms and left behind families shattered by an unexpected violent end. From a legendary running back's stunning final moments to an unsolved ritualistic slaying, each story is a dark chapter that the NFL and college football can never forget. Sean Taylor was one of the most talented and feared safeties in the NFL, a defensive titan whose career was tragically cut short at its absolute peak. Born in 1983 in Miami, Florida, Taylor was a star at the University of Miami before being drafted 5th overall by the Washington Redskins in 2004. Known for his devastating hits and unparalleled athleticism, he quickly became one of the best defensive backs in the league. However, his life was violently extinguished on November 27, 2007, when he was only 24 years old. Taylor, who was recovering from a knee injury, was at his home in Palmetto Bay, Florida, with his fiancée and their 18-month-old daughter. Intruders broke into his home, believing the family was away. Taylor confronted them and was shot in the leg, severing his femoral artery. He died early the next morning from massive blood loss. The investigation quickly determined the murder was not random. 4 men were arrested, and one of them, Eric Rivera Jr., was a neighbor of Taylor's who knew his routine. Rivera and his accomplices had planned to rob the house, which had been broken into just a week earlier. The senseless loss of a young life and an elite talent shocked the sports world. Taylor's number 21 was immediately retired by the franchise. Rivera was eventually convicted of second-degree murder and armed burglary in 2013 and sentenced to 57 years in prison. The murder of Sean Taylor remains one of the most prominent modern tragedies in the NFL, a brutal illustration that even the biggest stars are vulnerable to the darkness of the outside world. 2. Darrent Williams, a promising young cornerback for the Denver Broncos, was an innocent victim of a drive-by shooting that occurred during a moment of celebration. Born in 1982 in Fort Worth, Texas, Williams was a respected player at Oklahoma State and was drafted by the Broncos in the second round of the 2005 NFL Draft. By his second season, he had established himself as a solid contributor on the Broncos' defense. His life ended abruptly and violently just hours after ringing in the new year. In the early morning hours of January 1, 2007, Williams, then 24, was a passenger in a limousine leaving a New Year's Eve party at a Denver nightclub. A confrontation had taken place earlier inside the club between Williams' party and a group led by Willie Clark. As the limousine drove away, Clark's vehicle pulled alongside, and shots were fired into the vehicle. Williams was struck in the neck and died at the scene. He left behind a young son and daughter. The murder investigation was intense, and 2 years later, Willie Clark was arrested and charged. Prosecutors successfully argued that Clark was the gunman seeking revenge for the earlier dispute. Clark was eventually convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison plus 377 years for the murder of Williams and other related charges. Darrent Williams' death was a heartbreaking example of a young athlete caught in a senseless, escalating cycle of street violence. A life cut short over a petty dispute that should have been nothing more than a bad night out. 3. Steve McNair, an iconic quarterback known as Air McNair, who played 13 seasons for the Houston, Tennessee Oilers and the Baltimore Ravens, died in a brutal murder-suicide that shocked the entire NFL. Born in 1973 in Mount Olive, Mississippi, McNair was a 4-time Pro Bowl selection and the co-NFL MVP in 2003. He was universally respected for his toughness and leadership. After retiring in 2007, his life was suddenly cut short on July 4, 2009. McNair, 36, was found dead in a rented condo in Nashville, Tennessee, alongside his 20-year-old mistress, Sahel Kazemi. Both had died from multiple gunshot wounds. The investigation determined that Kazemi shot McNair 4 times, twice in the head, before turning the gun on herself. The motive was determined to be a murder-suicide rooted in a toxic, volatile relationship. Kazemi was reportedly struggling with significant financial pressure and was convinced that McNair was having another affair, leading her to believe he was abandoning her. McNair was married with 4 children at the time of his death. The tragedy revealed a heartbreaking double life led by the beloved star, showing that even the greatest celebrity cannot shield a person from their darkest personal secrets and the destructive power of infidelity and rage. Steve McNair's shocking death was a profound and public tragedy, a sudden, violent end that forever complicated the legacy of an NFL hero. 4. Fred Lane was a hard-running NFL running back whose career was on the rise before he was murdered by his own wife. Born in 1975 in Tallahassee, Florida, Lane played for the Carolina Panthers and had a reputation as a tough, durable back. After 4 seasons, his career seemed poised for a long run in the NFL, but in the early morning hours of July 6, 2000, tragedy struck at his home in Charlotte, North Carolina. Lane, then 24, was shot to death in his own house. The initial confusion soon gave way to a shocking conclusion. His wife, Deidre Lane, had shot him multiple times. She immediately called 911, claiming the shooting was accidental. However, the subsequent investigation revealed a troubled and volatile marriage. Prosecutors found that Deidre, driven by marital strife and a substantial life insurance payout, had intentionally shot her husband. In January 2003, Deidre Lane pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. She was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison, of which she served just over 5. The murder of Fred Lane was a brutal case of domestic violence and greed that stunned the Panthers organization and the league, shattering the myth of the happy athlete's home and exposing the darkness that can lurk behind closed doors. 5. Randall Woodfield, a former Green Bay Packer, stands out as perhaps the darkest figure on this list, a convicted serial killer who terrorized the Pacific Northwest. Born in 1950, Woodfield was drafted in the 17th round by the Green Bay Packers in 1974, but was cut before the season began. His football failure coincided with a descent into a life of crime. Woodfield became known as the I-5 Killer or I-5 Bandit, a moniker given to a man responsible for a string of robberies, sexual assaults, and murders along the Interstate 5 corridor that runs through Oregon and Washington in the early 1980s. Though he was only convicted of one murder, that of Lori Ann Hahn in 1981, authorities linked him to at least 18 murders and suspected his involvement in up to 44 homicides and numerous rapes. His victims were often found shot or bludgeoned. Woodfield was a highly organized criminal who used his athletic build and former football fame to lure or intimidate his victims. In 1981, he was arrested and eventually sentenced to life imprisonment plus 99 years. Randall Woodfield is one of the most chilling examples of a former professional athlete crossing over into unimaginable criminal depravity, a true-life monster whose brief connection to the NFL only served to heighten the sensational horror of his crimes. 6. Reche Caldwell was a veteran wide receiver who played 6 seasons in the NFL for the San Diego Chargers and the New England Patriots. After his career ended, he spent years battling legal troubles and ultimately died in a seemingly random act of violence. Born in 1979 in Tampa, Florida, Caldwell was a former second-round pick known for his speed. Following his retirement in 2008, his life was marred by a series of arrests, including drug-related charges that led to a 27-month federal prison sentence. Despite his troubles, he was attempting to rebuild his life after his release. Tragically, in June 2020, Caldwell, 41, was fatally shot outside his home in Tampa, Florida. He was reportedly ambushed outside his apartment complex. The police investigation initially suggested a robbery attempt that turned deadly. Caldwell was shot multiple times and pronounced dead at the scene. His killer or killers fled, and for a time, the case was left open. However, in April 2021, a suspect, Marcus Liddell Johnson, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The case of Reche Caldwell is a sad, familiar tale of an athlete who fell on hard times after football and, even while trying to recover, became a victim of the same street violence he may have struggled to leave behind. 7. Chris Henry was a wide receiver for the Cincinnati Bengals, whose troubled career was tragically cut short in a bizarre and violent domestic dispute. Born in 1983 in Bellechasse, Louisiana, Henry was known for his incredible talent, but also for repeated arrests and suspensions that constantly put his NFL career in jeopardy. He had multiple run-ins with the law related to drugs, weapons, and assault, yet the Bengals continued to give him chances due to his potential. His life came to a fatal end on December 17, 2009, when he was 26. Henry was involved in a domestic dispute with his fiancée Liana in Charlotte, North Carolina. The fight escalated, and Henry allegedly jumped into the bed of Liana's pickup truck as she drove away. Witnesses reported seeing him hanging on as the truck sped up. Henry then fell out of the moving vehicle on a winding residential road. He died from blunt force trauma injuries the next day. The police determined that Liana had not intentionally caused his death, and no charges were filed against her. An autopsy of Chris Henry's brain later revealed evidence of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, adding another layer of complexity to his erratic behavior and violent end. His death was a tragic culmination of a life lived on the edge, constantly battling his own demons until the struggle literally threw him from the path of life. 8. The murder of Terry White, a former defensive back for the New England Patriots, is a cold case that has remained unsolved for nearly 4 decades. White, born in 1955, played briefly for the Patriots in 1978. After his football career, he settled in his home state of North Carolina. His life was violently interrupted on June 28, 1984, when he was 28 years old. White was found stabbed to death in a Raleigh apartment. The circumstances surrounding his death were immediately suspicious and complex, but no clear motive or suspect was ever firmly established. The details of the crime scene and the investigation at the time were insufficient to lead to an arrest, and over the years, the trail of the killer went completely cold. Terry White's case is a painful example of a player who fell into anonymity after his brief moment of fame, only to be found dead in a violent act that to this day has never been solved. His murder remains an open file with the Raleigh Police Department, a lingering injustice for his family, and a tragic reminder of how quickly life can be extinguished without consequence. 9. In 2009, 2 active Oakland Raiders players, Marcus Cooper and Corey Smith, went missing during a boating trip near the Gulf Coast. While not a homicide case, the tragedy involves an agonizing and violent end that shook the team and the league. Cooper, born in 1982, was a linebacker, and Smith, born in 1979, was a defensive end. Both were well-liked teammates who played for several teams before landing in Oakland. On February 28, 2009, the 2 players, along with 2 other former football players, embarked on a fishing trip in a small boat in the Gulf of Mexico. A storm quickly moved in, and the small boat was completely overwhelmed. The men were not carrying adequate safety equipment. Despite a massive search effort by the U.S. Coast Guard, only one body, that of Nick Schuyler, was eventually found alive, clinging to the overturned boat after nearly 2 days at sea. The bodies of Cooper and Smith and the other man were never found. They were officially presumed dead by drowning. The case was a brutal, slow-motion tragedy, not at the hands of a criminal, but at the hands of the unforgiving sea. The violent storm and the subsequent hours of terror the men must have endured made this an agonizingly visceral loss for the entire NFL community, a reminder that the world outside the stadium is capable of its own cruel and sudden violence. 10. The murder of former NFL player Will Smith, a defensive end who spent a decade with the New Orleans Saints, was a shocking act of road rage that took place just as he was beginning his life after football. Born in 1981 in Queens, New York, Smith was a defensive leader for the Saints and a key member of their Super Bowl XLIV championship team. He retired in 2014 and remained a beloved figure in New Orleans. On April 9, 2016, Smith, 34, was driving in the city's Lower Garden district with his wife Raquel when their vehicle was rear-ended by another car. The ensuing argument escalated into a violent confrontation. The driver of the other vehicle, Cardell Hayes, pulled out a gun and shot Smith multiple times, killing him. He also shot Raquel twice in the legs. Hayes, a former semi-pro football player, was arrested at the scene. The investigation revealed a history of mutual resentment and a stunning loss of control that turned a fender bender into a deadly confrontation. Hayes was charged and eventually convicted of manslaughter and attempted manslaughter. In 2019, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The murder of Will Smith was a painful reminder to the city of New Orleans that even a local hero is not safe from the sudden, lethal eruptions of anger and violence that can tear through a community. 11. Dave Duerson, a 2-time Super Bowl champion safety and 4-time Pro Bowl selection for the Chicago Bears, New York Giants, and Phoenix Cardinals, tragically ended his own life, a death later proven to be violently connected to the devastating effects of head trauma. Duerson, born in 1961, was a respected and powerful figure on the field. After his retirement, he pursued a business career and served on the NFL's retirement board. However, he struggled with severe cognitive and emotional issues that led to bankruptcy and depression. On February 17, 2011, Duerson, 50, committed suicide by shooting himself in the chest at his home in Miami. Crucially, before he pulled the trigger, he sent a text message to his family asking them them to donate his brain to the Boston University School of Medicine for research into chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. His final violent act was not one of despair alone, but a deliberate final attempt to help advance the science of brain disease in football. His brain was examined and found to have advanced signs of CTE. Dave Duerson's suicide and the specific manner in which he carried it out to preserve his brain was a pivotal moment in the public discussion about football, head trauma, and the mental anguish it inflicts on players. His death, a tragic result of his time on the field, is a lasting, painful symbol of the hidden violence of the game. If I missed any player in the video, please name them in the comments. If you enjoyed this, I'll be posting a lot more interesting videos on the channel. I'd greatly appreciate it if you could like and subscribe.